Hey everyone, and welcome to the Weekly Marketer Podcast. Every single week, we interview deep dive experts in one of the many fields of marketing to drop huge knowledge bombs for the best of the best and teach you how to take your marketing skills to the next level. This is episode 005, and we're interviewing Jason Myers. Jason is an expert storyteller with a PhD in history and many years of experience in copywriting. Presently, he's the content strategist for a company called Plum Voice. Today, he's going to sit down and tell us why storytelling matters for your marketing program and how to use storytelling to take your company to the next level. Jason, thanks for joining us.
Hey, thanks, Jeremy. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you've done quite a bit in the world of copywriting and done a lot of different sort of projects, is my understanding. So could you give us a little bit of a background about yourself?
Yeah, sure, not a problem. So as you mentioned, my background is really started off in the academic world. So I went to grad school for history. So I have a PhD in history from Loyola University Chicago. Go Ramblers! And then after grad school, I actually stayed in higher ed for a number of years in various positions. But what I ended up doing is working freelance on the side, doing various writing projects. And then as more I got into it, I found I could parlay that into actually working in a non-academic way, and I could be a writer, and it could be something that could pay the bills. It could be very feasible. And in all honesty, academic writing is much more difficult than writing marketing copy. I always sort of laugh, and we're like, oh yeah, we have this project we need done, and I'm better about it now. But originally my question was, well, how long does it need to be? And they were saying, 3 or 4 pages, and I'm like, that's it. I was like, I have a 300-page book you can buy on Amazon. Like after that, anything is,
Yeah, it'll be fine.
So I worked a bunch of freelance jobs, and I was fortunate enough to get on with my current company, Plum Voice. So I started as a copywriter there, and I've sort of evolved into this general copywriter / content guru strategist, and I've even started now to take on analyst relations as well. It's sort of the next frontier for me professionally.
Gotcha. That's fantastic. So that's interesting that you brought up kind of an interesting topic, which is, clearly you have a lot of experience in a lot of different sort of writing backgrounds. What would you say is kind of the biggest difference between kind of academic and, kind of marketing writing in general, kind of, and how does that relate? Is there different styles of storytelling and things like that? And, when it comes to those?
Yeah, so I work remotely now, but when I was in Denver and I was working at the University of Denver, I did take a couple of business classes. Took this marketing class, and the class was horrible. It was one of the worst classes I've ever taken. And trust me, when you've spent 15 years in a university, that's saying something. But anyway, the point is you don't have as much space. And that is one area where I still struggle, right? Because I remember saying to the instructor, she said, well, this needs to be shorter. And I said, well, if I make it any shorter, the person who's reading it won't have the context to understand why it says what it says. So do you want context or do you want it shorter? And she says, I want both. And I said, well, you can't have both. That's not how language works. So
Right.
to me, the difference between the sort of academic writing is academic writing, it tends to be much more buttoned up. You don't use contractions, it's very formal, very sort of rigid. I personally don't really enjoy it that much, but that's a big difference. And also in academic writing, you have obviously a lot more space. And part of the thing is there, you have much bigger ideas that you're trying to develop. And with that, you're not only just trying to explain what the ideas are, but you are presenting evidence to support your claim and then explaining that evidence. So that takes up a lot of page space, right? But the thing that I think helps carry over to business and to more of a marketing approach is that even though you don't have the space necessarily to do as much of that as I would like, still having that ingrained necessity of context and explanation and what's the evidence? How do you know that? Just sort of that idea rolling around in the back of my head really helps to put into high relief what's important in the project that I'm currently working on, right? So if I'm trying to sell, widgets, explaining, be really hyper focused about, at least in the back of your mind, about why this widget is the right widget, right?
Right. That's actually a great point you bring up and kind of transitions well into kind of my next sort of question, which is, I see a lot of people and they kind of say things, you know what I mean? They're not really telling a coherent sort of story. They're not really going anywhere. They're, maybe when it comes to their product, they're listing features or they're saying that it's great, but they're not really saying why it's great. And they're talking about where the idea came from, but they're not really giving context as to why the idea matters and how, the idea was formed and what the journey to get from idea to where they are is and things like that. So, in your own words, why does storytelling matter in regards to business? And particularly, though, a lot of my audience is startups. So, why does storytelling matter to kind of early stage growth companies?
Right. No, and that's a great question. And in one of my recent analyst calls, one of the analysts I was speaking with, he said a lot of companies, what they tended to focus on is selling the sausage, not the sizzle. And this happens all the time. I'm an internal copywriter for my company, and we have to sort of step back and check ourselves once in a while. It's like, we're too close to this. Let's take a step back, right? So part of the problem is, especially, in startups, when you're putting in 80, 100 hours a week and you are so close to your product and your technology, I mean, it is everything to you. And I understand that. But either it works or doesn't, right? And to some extent, that's all that people need to know. If you're out there selling it, hopefully that means it works. And that should be enough. You don't need to get into the weeds about your technology and how, it's like on that show Silicon Valley, we're going to change the world. It's like, no, 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 no. So the thing with storytelling is you have to actually think of it as a story. And as simple as it is, or maybe as rudimentary as it seems, a story has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And part of the problem that I see a lot of companies do, or a lot of people, a lot of marketing materials out there do, is that they're too eager to tell people about what they do. As we're company X, we do Y. Let me tell you about company X, why it's so important that you go with company X. So they're too eager to tell, and there's not enough sell. Right? So what you need to do is, what's the beginning of the story? The beginning of the story is not what your product does. All right? That's actually the middle. The beginning of the story is your prospect's problem.
Interesting. Yeah, that is a thing I see a lot of people messing up. And I think I kind of get what you're getting at, which is that, people are so eager to talk about their product. They're so eager to talk about, the specific features they have and things like that. And really, those are kind of necessary but not sufficient when it comes to staking your claim in the marketplace, right? You have to tick those boxes before the conversation even starts. And now you're saying kind of why you, and you can't say why you without first properly framing the problem. Is that kind of what you're getting at?
Yeah. So, I mean, think about someone comes to your website, and the first thing that they're like, oh, okay, I want to know about the latest super widget. So I'm going to go to your website. So I Google super widgets, and, your ad comes up. I click on your ad and go there. And it's like, oh, what's this super widget do? Because you need that hook, right? And you need them to instantly see what you're doing and be like, yes, I have that problem. I want to know more. Right. So you want to be able to identify, and if you have your marketing personas, you should know this kind of stuff.
Right. Yeah, you should understand the problem that you're solving at a fundamental level to be able to even tell the story you want to tell.
Right. And so you start with the problem, right? So say you're not a morning person, you keep your phone on silent, and for some reason you want a custom app that wakes you up in the morning, even though your phone's on vibrate, that kind of.
Yeah. Overrides the silent, yeah, or something, yeah.
If you want something like that, and then, how do I do that? I just want to be able to press a button and do it. I don't have to go searching for all this kind of stuff, right? So then it's all about sort of empathy, right? It's putting yourself in the buyer's shoes. And so your sort of kickoff is something along the lines of waking up to a buzzer gives you a migraine, something like that, right? Or does an alarm buzzer in the morning just make you want to punch your alarm clock, something like that? Or how many alarm clocks have you gone through in the last 3 months because you couldn't stand the buzzer? Right? So my response is like, yes, I hate that sound.
Right, there you go.
Right. So once you get in that area, we're like, now you've got them, right? So you need to get that hook where you're sort of on an even par with them and you're on the same wavelength. The buyer's like, oh, this is what I hate, and you're like, look, this is what you hate, right?
Yeah. Right. So you're connecting with them on that level, and then you're also showing that you understand their problem.
Exactly. And so then once you say, okay, look, you've gone through 3 alarm clocks in the last 3 weeks. This is not sustainable. It's like, but with app XYZ, you can easily schedule a different song every morning, depending on the day of the week, say. And so all right, oh, okay, so I don't have to listen to this horrible beeping sound. I can be woken up to a thing. I can schedule it for whatever. So you have your situation, you have the impact. You want to quantify the impact this situation is having. Where the pain point is. Like what it's doing. So you've gone through 3 alarm clocks. That's not cool. You're wasting money. You don't want to be wasting that money. So here's your problem. Here's what the problem's doing to you, and here's the resolution. Like our app can do this. You can do it in 3 clicks. You can, it's automatically got Spotify and Apple Music, whatever, and you can set custom schedules and all this kind of stuff. So it's building out from the customer's problem, as opposed to saying, set it up in 3 seconds. It's like, well, set what up in 3 seconds? Like, why do I need to spend my time setting this up? Or like integrate with all your favorite songs. Like integrate what? Why do I need songs? Because you hate that alarm sound. That's why.
Right. Yeah. So a solution without a properly framed question or a properly framed problem really isn't saying anything to anybody. You're just like basically walking around bragging. You know what I mean?
That's exactly right. So you need to start with the pain point. That's the big thing. Identify the pain point. Identify what the pain point does. Why is it a pain point? Well, because it costs you more money. Your Amazon bills go up. Your ice maker is going to run out faster, and so is your supply of Tylenol. From your animalistic vengeance on your alarm clock.
Sure. Makes sense. Yeah. So I really like that. That's interesting. So storytelling clearly matters really because I mean, when it comes down to it, if you're not properly framing and structuring a story, you're not really conveying the information that you want to, right? And ultimately, you're not going to reach the customers that you want to in the way you want if you're not properly conveying that information by structuring it correctly. And so, as I think, I'm putting myself in the headspace of like a startup person, right? And who's saying, okay, I get that storytelling matters a lot. I understand that this is a really important thing. I want to start telling better stories to my customers, but I have so many contexts in which to do it. I only have, a specific amount of time to grab them, right? There's a lot of limitations with like, Facebook ads only allows me so many characters and I only can get, so many people, like seconds of attention from people and things like that. How do you take that kind of storytelling mentality? And as you kind of touched on earlier with academic writing, you can context. How do you tell succinct kind of stories in this context? And how do you carry this lessons of, how to tell a great story forward into kind of practical, business applications, right? Like I'm a startup and I want to tell great stories. Where and how do I do that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And there's not really a simple answer for that because, it's the answer always, it kind of depends, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
you
My
have,
favorite answer that I give all of my clients. It depends.
well, because you bring up some great examples. For example, Google AdWords, you've got 30 characters in your headlines. You got 80 or 90 characters in your description. So you've got to make your point and you've got to make it quick. And Facebook ads, you want to be able to grab someone right away. Being able to translate one of these, a hook, right? This identification of a pain point will depend on the medium and how much room you have to do that. And then, I mean, in all honesty, writing is easy. Editing is difficult. So what I would do in a situation like that is I would pick my chosen medium, right? Let's just say doing Facebook ads, right? Look at what the restrictions are. And just so have those in the back of your mind. But the first draft, what you should do, you just write out as long as it needs to be to convey what's in your brain, right?
So you're saying that like you need to start off by saying like not kind of look at the limitations that somebody gives you, right? But then before you put something into the limitations, write it out complete first, right? Like separate from the limitations. Set those to the side for the second.
Yeah. Ignore them to begin with, and just what do you want to tell people? Figure out what do you want people to know, right? So if you're targeting a certain group of people, men and women age 18 to 25 on Facebook, what do those people want to hear? Or what is their pain point vis-a-vis your product or whatever you're selling, right? And so you think about that, and then you write out, you just brain dump, and you're like, well, our product is this, and and you can write it really informal, just as you say it. You could explain it, pretend you're explaining it to somebody in the room, and write out what you say. And then once you have all the pieces written down, then what you can do is you go through and you start excising, right? You just start cutting things out, figuring out what are the important words here. You have to be able to identify what the important words are, sort of take those out, isolate those, and then figure out what those most critical words are, then take those and fit those into your limitations. And so then you can figure out, say you've got 30 characters, right? Like an AdWords thing. So I've got these two words, and together those are 16 characters. So that means I've got another 14 to make these make sense. Then it's just a matter of plug and chug, right? You can invert them, you can just trying different things until you get something that you think makes sense. A lot of it is just finding the right terminology and finding a way to convey those terms that's going to grab someone's attention, right? And that's another part of storytelling that can be really challenging, is a lot of it depends on sort of what your company's outward facing brand is. For example, the Wendy's Twitter, very informal, they'll roast people, and it's hilarious and it's fun, but not all companies can do that, right?
It's funny when my burger place does it. It's not so funny when my insurance company does it.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So, an insurance company, it's much more academic, and it's much more sort of dry. You're not going to talk about cake stands or crushing burgers late at night. It's more of a Joe Friday type of thing, right? It's like, just the facts, ma'am. But even in that context, you have to be able to identify what the important words or phrases are that constitute just the facts, ma'am, and be able to present those right from the get-go. And then, like in an AdWords, you have your two headlines. So you can do your situation, your impact, the pain point, what it's costing you. And then your description could be how you're solving the problem. Or you can have the pain point be both the headlines, and then put the impact and the resolution in the description, whatever fits. And a lot of it is, again, this editing process is going back and figuring out what works and what doesn't.
So would it be fair to kind of basically summarize all of this as a practical advice on how to write a great story is to first start off, think about who your audience is, and then just brain dump what you want to say. After that, you edit down into a bunch of different options, right, that you might have that would fit into the parameters of what you're trying to do. And then finally, look at those options, think about your brand, and think about who you're trying to reach, and choose an option that sets up the problem properly for that audience, accomplishes telling the message that you want, so problem, solution, bliss, essentially, right? Like, and then, and then also keeps your brand voice in mind and fits it. So it's kind of a process of, dumping and then just reduction until you get down to what really kind of fits all of the parameters and accomplishes all of the goals. Would that be a fair way of saying, like, kind of what your process is when it comes to storytelling?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of truth to that. I think that's a pretty good summarization. And the thing you have to remember is, in the background, as you're doing all this, you have to keep these sort of building blocks in mind, this beginning, middle, end sort of framework, because it's like a three-legged stool. If you take one out, it's just going to fall over.
That makes a ton of sense. So, what is the problem outside of, we kind of looked at like a high level of what the process is and kind of the differences between academic writing, which I think a lot of people, most of us went through at least high school, right? And so we kind of have an idea of kind of maybe not high level academic writing, but that sort of writing versus business writing. And we've covered a lot of sort of things, but what sort of actionable takeaways when you look at companies that are trying to tell stories and they're either failing or they're doing something really right? What's some things that you see people doing really right that you think more people should be doing? And what's some things you see people doing wrong that, they need to stop?
It's funny because if you're out looking for a job, right? One of the things that you see so often in job ads is ability to communicate clearly, critical thinking, these sorts of what we tend to call soft skills. And the ironic thing is that pretty much anyone who went to college and has a humanities degree, has these skills. These people have this skill set, and they tend to come from writing heavy disciplines. And so the thing that companies do right and they do wrong, and this is sort of related here, is they put in the time not only to tell a good story, but to present it well, right? Because the way you present the story, you could have really good ideas. You could understand the pain points and the impact of those pain points, and you might have a really good handle on how your product addresses those. But at the end of the day, if it's still poorly written, if the actual flow of the actual prose is not good, full of grammatical errors, using the wrong prepositions, it sounds so simple, using less instead of fewer or fewer instead of less in the right context, these sorts of things, people may not necessarily process it as that's why they don't like it. Someone who has more of a writing background will. And so I think that what companies are doing right are most likely doing, and the ones that are not investing the time and the money into good editing and into good writers. The average sentence length that you can use for holding someone's attention is 14 words. If you go longer than a 14-word sentence, it can become too confusing, too complex. And so the idea then is, and this sort of gets back to what I was talking about a little bit earlier, and sort of the difference between academic and sort of business writing, where academic writing tends to be very long and full of jargon. But think like Hemingway. Hemingway is the king of short, succinct, powerful language. And so write shorter, write succinct. Instead of just throwing a comma in there, put a period and move on. Identify subject, verb. Again, it gets really sort of nuts and bolts here, but that's what makes good writing, understanding what words are and how they relate to each other. I think the companies that tell good stories simply have good writers, people who can actually string together a sentence well, because it may not even be the sexiest or the most, wow, blow your mind story, but at the end of the day, is it effective? And good writing will be more effective.
So what you're seeing is that a lot of people have a good handle on, what the problem is and then what their solution offers, but they're just not putting in the work, or maybe are misunderstanding, the need to actually tell a succinct and well-written story that's easily understood by everybody that they're trying to reach.
Yeah, and when you have something that you think is ready, and you and I have friends that we've both worked with it. I've said to them, like, dude, you need to let me look at this before you send this out, because this is trash. Like, I know what you're doing here, but like, I need 5 minutes to clean this up, and it will look so much better. Just having the wherewithal to be able to step back and look at something and say, okay, I've given it my best shot. I need to get it out really fast. I need to get this done. But taking the extra 5 minutes to have an extra set of eyes that knows what they're doing, look at it, can make a huge difference. Because then if you run off to Kinko's and you make 1,000 copies of this thing, you're passing it all over the city, I mean, you're going to look like an idiot, because you're like, oh, what's good enough? And I think that's one of the biggest problems that you see a lot with business and marketing writing is, the whole 80-20 rule, it certainly applies, right? 80% of the way there and we're good. I think that that's true for getting something to the point where it needs a final set of eyes, right?
Right. Yeah, so that last 20% matters when you're trying to present your company to the world, right?
Yeah, so 80-20 until you get to that, whatever that final draft is. And once you're at that final draft, that's when you really need to get that extra set of eyes to really get that fine tuning.
Right. And as an aside, I find a lot of marketing, deadlines, most of them are self-imposed. Like they're made up marketing deadlines, right? And so I think that, taking the extra 5 minutes, and that's something that I struggle with. I have struggled with in the past, at least. I've kind of had to check myself and say, like, okay, walk away for 5 minutes, come back, give it a read out loud, make sure that it all makes sense, because the last thing you want to do is put something out to the world that's going to make you look foolish in front of your customer, because failing fast with your copy is a good way of failing fast with acquiring new customers. So no, that's really interesting. So definitely, kind of the takeaway lesson seems to be to take the extra 5 minutes, put in that extra work when it comes to your copy, and 80-20 rule does apply, but maybe go 85-15 and you'll end up doing 50% better.
Yeah. You mentioned something there, and I think is really important. Read it out loud. Don't just read it in your head, read it out loud, and even better, have someone else read it out loud. If it's something that's really short, I mean, when they read it, you'll hear immediately where the problems are. And then you're like, oh, that doesn't sound right, or you're not reading that right. Well, no, they read it correctly because they're reading it, and that's how your customers are going to read it. That's how your prospects are going to read it. And so they didn't read it incorrectly. They read it the way that most people are probably going to interpret this. So you need to fix it.
Right. Well, okay, that makes a lot of sense. I think reading it out loud is another wonderful takeaway. So I've got a couple of questions here that I got, just throughout the week, talking to people about, kind of what do you want to know about storytelling, and telling a great story in regards to your company. And so starting off, number one, first question I got here is, my product isn't very interesting and is in an extremely niche B2B space. How do I tell a great, interesting story about it?
Yes, I know what that's like. I've been there. Here's the thing: even if your product isn't super sexy and super interesting, if this is your question, and you're still a viable company, then there are companies that need what you have. Again, the story doesn't have to be sexy; it just has to be effective. So being able to identify that pain point and being able to have somebody go, aha, yes, I know that. That's all that matters. You just need the hook. And if you can be effective from there, then you're golden. If your product isn't super sexy, if your product is just simply effective, then you just need to be effective.
Okay, that's an interesting point. I think that's a really great way of summarizing it. Right? Is just saying, it doesn't have to be sexy. You don't have to tell this fun, cool, whimsical story. Right? You can just say, you can tell an effective, to the point, no nonsense story, and that can work just as well.
Oh, for sure, for sure. And that's the thing. Like, I always want to go for the funny thing, the sort of the inside joke, the Star Wars reference or whatever. But my company, that's not. I mean, in our blog, we might do some of that, but on our marketing material, we don't. That's not it at all. So a lot of times, I'll start with the funny thing, and so I'll write that all out, and then I'll reduce from there. And that's a perfectly viable strategy as well, because then it's sort of cathartic for you then as the writer, and you're going to edit it all out anyway, but you were still able to put it down there, and if nothing else, it got the juices flowing, right? It gets you to just start putting things down, and a lot of times that's one of the big hurdles.
Right. Okay, that makes a lot of sense, I think. So just, yeah, definitely kind of match the market tone, match the kind of your brand voice, and definitely look at it that way.
And match the expectations of your buyers. So if again, don't have a sexy product and you're selling to insurance companies that don't need that sort of flash and flare, they're not expecting that. They want the Joe Friday version.
Makes sense. Yeah. Cool. Okay. So next question here. That was a great answer. Thanks, Jason. Next question. I can't write. Is there alternative ways to tell a good story? Maybe a podcast or a video? Would you apply the same lessons?
That's a great question. I think the framework needs to stay the same, right? Find the hook. What's the title of the episode of your podcast, right? What's the pain point, and what impact does that pain point have? And then what's the resolution of that? Once you've got a handle on that framework, you can apply it to any medium. I mean, if you can't write, but you can talk till the cows come home and you're effective in that regard, by all means. It's just really a matter of being able to identify what your strengths are and being able to meet your prospects and your buyers where they are. So, I mean, you may not be a good writer, but if your buyers are listening to podcasts or watching videos, then yeah, sure, go that route. Although I will say, if you're doing a video, you should write a script for the video so you know it's going to be said.
Yeah, I never do that. Not with my videos. I just go in cold. I actually don't even edit most of them, to be honest. I just kind of go one take and then hit it. So But I should write a script. You were probably right.
Okay, and again, it all depends, right? So if you're just doing sort of like a how-to explainer, you might just have like a little outline. I guess maybe that's the thing. If you know your talking points so well, you don't need to write them down. You can just have an outline, and that's really just to make sure you don't forget anything, right? But I think the point of being aware of how the story affects your prospect, I think, is the thing that you really need to have down. How you choose to present that is entirely up to you.
Makes sense. Cool. Well, I really like that. I think that's useful advice. So last question here. My company sells to multiple different sorts of clients. How do I tell an inclusive story that reaches each archetype, or should I even try and just focus down on one? What's your advice?
That's a great question, because here's the thing. You can have a company that sells the same product to multiple different verticals, and there are nuanced differences in how you pitch those verticals. In that case, having a single unified message, I think, might be actually kind of dangerous in some respects. There are two things that I think about this. One, you have to go at even bigger macro level, right? So if you're selling to all these companies, then there has to be some commonality between. There has to be some common pain point. So at the macro level, you focus on just that common pain point, nothing else.
Right. So just the common pain point across all of your different verticals, and not focus on some of the other.
Right. If that's your homepage, boom, that's your H1, right? But as you drill down on your sub pages, you clearly have to identify, this product helps these verticals, these industries, these whatever. Then once you're able to hook them initially that you're going to solve the problem, and then show them that, this is sort of the resolution, right? Resolution on your homepage is, here's the problem, here's how it affects you, here's the resolution because our thing will work with your industry. Click here to learn more about how that works, and then you do start all over again. So for your industry, here's your specific pain point. Here's how it impacts you, and here's how it's like siloing, right? So you have these different silos, and so you have your broad header, and then you repeat the process for all your verticals.
That makes a lot of sense. So basically, find the common pain point, but when it comes to each different vertical, each different customer archetype, what have you, then go ahead and kind of direct people down their respective rabbit holes and make it more and more specific just to them as you go down.
Right.
Okay, perfect. Well, Jason, I really appreciate the time that you've given us here today. I want to give you 1 minute to plug anything you want. I always let my guests plug anything that they'd like here at the end, and so let you plug. But thank you again so much for joining us.
Sure. Well, I appreciate the chance to come on and talk some shop, and it's been a good time. I guess the only things that I would plug is, one, I have a book on Amazon. If you Google or go on Amazon, type in my name, Jason Myers, Myers, and the word Ireland, you will be able to find my book. It's in paperback. It's quite affordable. If you know someone who's obsessed with Ireland, want to give them a book about Irish history, I highly encourage them to do mine. And then the other thing is I do freelance copywriting. So if you need someone to take an extra look at something, I'm more than happy to do that. I've got a Facebook page, The Content Doctor, and I also have doctorofcontent@gmail.com. So if you have any needs, I am available on a freelance basis, and I can turn things around pretty quickly, especially for marketing stuff. Like I said, it tends to be pretty short, so it's not too much of a problem for me.
Cool. All right. Well, Jason, thank you so much again. Truly appreciate you coming here and educating everybody on the proper way to tell a story. Lots of awesome lessons to take forward and use to, take your marketing to the next level, and not just your marketing, every aspect of it to kind of convey the value that you've been working so hard to build. So thank you, Jason. And thank you all, everybody listening. Happy marketing.